Hey everybody, welcome back to Electric Cafe. Today's album review is on Primal Scream's 1991 album, Screamadelica. Did I say Screamadelica? I feel like I'm saying that wrong. Sometimes when you see words in print, in type, and you're like, it doesn't look right. This is definitely one that doesn't look right. Um, so Primal Scream are from Scotland, and they got together in like 1982. And this, after a few sort of albums, this kind of album really put them on the map. They mix a lot of different genres in their style. It's kind of like there's a little bit of acid house in there, sort of some indie rock, a little bit of dub in there, some psychedelic rock, some down tempo. There's definitely a hippie vibe in there as well. Um, when I think of this album, my favorite songs are Higher Than the Sun, Moving On Up, Come Together, and Loaded, which are, I'm sure most would agree those are probably the four best songs on here. Um, there's definitely some anthems of dance music on here, like, Moving On Up and Come Together are like just anthems, in dance music over the last 35 years. Um, I put in here that it almost helped dance music become the new gospel of music. This album is like, I don't know if there was a better mix of dance music and rock music at the time than this one came out. Like, this one arguably is probably the best rock dance music album of all time. Um, and I'm not talking on the harder side like Nine Inch Nails or the blending of industrial and rock and like this is more rock music with more dance music. Like what album blended it better than this album did? Um, Andrew Weatherall, the amazing Andrew Weatherall, rest in peace. Obviously, did a great job on the production on here, on some of the songs that he worked on, including his excellent remix of Loaded. Um, he had a huge hand in helping this album reach a different level. Um, there's a lot of good tracks on here. As far as the opportunities on the album, there's definitely some tracks that haven't aged that well, and that's gonna be, unfortunately, that's the kind of sometimes the crux of dance music is if you're trying to be too hip, it could sound dated, and when you're using a similar beat like a lot of indie dance bands do, you use the same beat, you use it a lot, and it kind of gets overused, and it was definitely overused by a lot of people, and that sort of Manchester Happy Mondays beat was used a lot, and it became old really fast, and unfortunately it makes a lot of songs that use that beat old. Like you think of like EMF, like Unbelievable. You know what I mean? Just kind of kind of didn't hasn't dated as well as. I'm happy to say that the songs that I like on here, they're still classics. But there's some Slip Inside the House, the second track with Denise Johnson on vocals. That one kind of sounds really dated right now. Unfortunately. I have it 1.5 stars. Moving on up, 3 stars. Don't fight it, feel it. I like the groove on this one. I think this one's aged well. 3 stars. Higher Than the Sun's my favorite song on the album. 4 stars. Inner Flight, 1.5 stars. Rough song there. Come Together is my second favorite song on the album. It's aged well, in some respect. It's an anthem. That sample, the Come Together sample, it's just works so well. 4 stars. Loaded, another anthem, 3.5 stars. Damaged. I don't like it as much as other people might like Damaged. The piano's nice, but the lyrics don't do too much for me. The singing doesn't do too much for me. The chorus doesn't do too much for me. I got 2.25 stars. It's a good song though. I'm Coming Down, 3 stars. Um, Higher Than the Sun, the other version, I gave 2 stars. I don't think it's that great. Shine Like Stars, I like the ending of the album, putting this song at the end. I really like it. It's 3 stars as well. So I add up the stars. You know, 7, 11, 12, 16, 19, 21, 24, 25, 6, 27, 28. I got it 30 stars and 3/4, 30 and 3/4 stars divided by 11 gives it a solid 2.79. So yeah, it's right under 70 as a rating. And considering the importance of this album and the classics that are on here, I pushed it up a couple points to give it a 70 out of 100. I think it's a very good album. I think in some ways it hasn't necessarily aged that well, but in some ways it's kind of like an example of that time, like the perfect example of dance music and rock music in 1990. And obviously it's super influential for what came out after it. You know, in many ways, it is a legendary album for people that grew up with it. I didn't get to hear. Well, I heard the popular songs when they came out, but I didn't necessarily hear this album till, I can't remember when the first time I heard this album in full, but it wasn't back in 1991. But again, I knew the songs. Some of the songs, Come Together and Loaded for sure. Back then. Yeah, really good album though. Really good album. Just a few songs haven't dated that well, but I don't think that stops me from still going back to it often and playing the better songs. But yeah, curious your thoughts on. I was also checking out their greatest hits. I got a chance to see Primal Scream. You know, a couple years later, they opened up for Depeche Mode in 1994, and that was interesting because that's probably a good example of the differences between American audiences and UK audiences during that time of what music they liked. Because sometimes when Depeche Mode would come over, like they were notorious for bringing over bands that were, you know, a little bit ahead of time. Well, ahead of the time for American audiences, but didn't quite work out that well. Some did, some didn't. Like I rather wish we would have had, even though I really loved I would have loved to have seen Sisters of Mercy. But Primal Scream, and they talked about it. They knew it wouldn't go over well them in American audiences. They just didn't quite get the, like I think in some ways like Primal Scream and some of these indie pop bands sort of seemed kind of hippie-ish and sort of like too 60s and 70s rock, and not maybe forward thinking as the sound of what like Depeche Mode was, or the stuff that we were into in the 80s and 90s. I think we were more like trying to get into like electronic music and sort of, you know, like Stabbing Westward was one that went over well. You know, a little bit more aggressive, more electronic, but the more 60s sound that was like experiencing. That was like going to experiencing your parents' favorite band. Like, you know, it just didn't really. It was like, it's like going to see Sly and the Family Stone, and you're seeing Sly and the Family Stone open up for Depeche Mode. Like, it's just not quite the right mix of fan bases and audience. And so the people that are going to see Depeche Mode, they're looking for like dance music. You know, and I had a lot of issues with Depeche Mode's opening bands after the 90s, especially. But yeah, in the 80s and 90s, they had a lot of good bands open for them, and Primal Scream was one of them. But just didn't quite work well with the band, and they even had a hit with Rocks at the time. Rocks was played on MTV radio, and it wasn't like a top 40 song or anything like that, but it was played well on the album. And I don't think a lot of people really knew the impact of Primal Scream in America in the early 90s, because this album was not played on American radio, and really even college radio. Not even compared to like even Happy Mondays or Soup Dragons or Jesus Jones or EMF or anything like that. Like this album was not played like that in America, unless you were into like dance music, like I was, and you like, okay, well, I knew Come Together and Moving On Up, you know, being from the dance community. So, just mentioning that in passing, but so a lot of Americans still don't know the impact of this album, and I would imagine for I've never really spoken to people about this album that were born and raised in UK and Scotland during the time of Primal Scream, but this album was huge in UK. I think it went like top five, right? Like maybe even top three. Like it could be a number one album for all I can remember. But I think it was top five. I think most of their albums were top five. But they're huge over there. But in America, I don't think any of their albums made the top 150. Just different styles of music. But I think that was mostly because Americans sort of felt like the sound was kind of old, even though it was dance music. It's just kind of strange. It's kind of that hippie vibe. I think there was definitely a lot of like Americans didn't quite, especially in 1991. We didn't. I mean, raves are just sort of getting starting in 1991, 92 in America. Like we didn't understand the sort of hippie-ish about the acid house rave scene in America. We didn't get that, so, and the media certainly didn't get that, and the general public didn't get that. Even alternative music didn't get that. So I could see how they sort of thought that this music was dated sounding and didn't understand the dance music part of it, and how it sort of brought the hippies sort of feeling into dance music. It wasn't quite understood, and so just my thoughts anyway in general on the history of Primal Scream. But yeah, they're still very underappreciated in America. Um, but yeah, 70 out of 100. I think it's a very good album overall. Um, but yeah, that's my thoughts on Primal Scream Screamadelic. All right, thanks for watching.